Tom. Thank you, Paul. Yes, hello, I am Katie. It's nice to be with you all here at King's Place, but also those streaming. So hello, hello, hello. I am Katie. I am the newest member of the Langcat, the sacrificial one at this time, it seems. As you'll have picked up from today, the theme is regenerate. And prior to joining the Langcat, I regenerated quite a few times as a journalist initially. So I covered a bit of everything as a local reporter. The strange, the serious, the court cases, the council meetings, you name it, I covered a bit of everything. I then moved into the world of hospitality, and that was rather nice, with some hotels and food and restaurants. And may have still been there if it wasn't for the thing of being made redundant. Never mind, not bitter about that at all. I then moved into the world of utilities, probably as boring as that sounds. And then most recently was editor of a publication aimed at you lovely people. So I got to know a little bit more about financial advice. From that, I then realised that there's actually, the advice profession itself has regenerated quite a few times over the decades and is likely to continue to do so in future. And a big part of that is regulation. So hopefully, as we said, it's a bit of a new thing. Get the guinea pig out to do 2 different time zones remotely. Let's see. Those are our guests, hopefully, we've got Cheyenne Walker, Australian Independent Compliance Solutions, and Aaron Shapiro from Morningstar, so Australia and America, me here all at the same time. What could possibly go wrong? Nothing at all, fingers crossed. If it does, well, I'm seriously hoping cats do have 9 lives because it sounded pretty serious earlier. So I'm really, really hoping by the power of technology, my guests will appear on the screen. Yes, here we are. Wait, that's it. Please put that in the feedback. Make sure I pass probation. Thank you very much. Can you both hear me?
Yes.
Yes, that's the next important thing, isn't it? Right, excellent. Okay, I'm going to sit here so I don't keep looking at this because then I'll probably have my back to those streaming and see from there. Cheyenne, can we start with you? What time is it where you are?
It is 9:30 at night, so a long day.
There we go. And just to prove we are live and I haven't actually somehow pre-recorded this, could you give us a little wave or a little clap or... Lovely, brilliant. Okay, thank you very much. We could have just timed that perfectly, but we haven't. We're also running slightly behind, I think. So excellent. Aaron, all okay with you? What time is it there where you are?
It is 6:30 in the morning here in Washington, D.C.
Lovely. I can only apologise for that. I'm so sorry. But thank you both for joining us. We're obviously incredibly appreciative. And it is new, it is different, and very much hoping the audience can learn from elsewhere. So there's lots of changes that have been happening in the UK. Part of the advice profession changing is because of regulation. We find, I think personally, that the FCA is actually going through a little bit of regeneration itself, possibly at the moment. We're seeing that lots with the consumer duty. We've got the advice guidance boundary review and how that might shift the market as well. And we've got retirement income review. And so we could see a lot of changes happen. Cheyenne, if we start with you, could you give us a little bit of a run through of some of the main changes we've been seeing in Australian regulation and specifically for the advice world as well?
Yes, absolutely. It's pretty much exactly 5 years ago that we actually were handed down the Royal Commission final report, and that definitely wasn't pretty. It was focused on the misconduct in the banking, superannuation and financial services. It lasted 15 months and we had 76 recommendations. So we had waves of navigating of duplicate rules and regulations. So we've certainly been there. Please do not make our same mistake and just be over-regulated to too much red tape that it just constrains you to actually deliver advice to clients at all. We certainly had negative media for months and months and months. Our popularity as financial advisors, I think we were 60% trusted by Australians. After the Royal Commission, it fell to 35%. So the reputational damage was huge. And over the last 5 years, we've had certainly so much regulations that we've gone through. And I guess that's resulted in Australia really being recognised as the most highly regulated financial services in the world. So really don't want that title. And yes, to my extent, I think basically the government overreacted. They went above and beyond what the recommendation proposals were. So we had all these changes, and it was more of a layered device sort of thing. So instead of going back to fix the rules, we just got more rules on top of each other pretty much. So that's just resulted in so much red tape. But some of the changes that are happening in the industry, so conflicted remuneration, that's been banned. There's no more like volume-based, there's no more commissions in investment products. We've got level commission rates for insurance. Non-monetary benefits from product providers are really restricted. I think there's like $300 per annum, that is. What we saw is the banks exited the financial planning space. They decided that it was not profitable for them to be into business providing financial advice. But that was after they paid out $4.4 billion in compensation to clients in remediation programs. That just tied up a lot of the industry resources as well, going through all those programs. So we saw a big shift in the structure of how we operated from an advice point of view. So instead of having like institutional 6 big players, we had like 16,000 self-licensee advice firms. So a lot of them have less than 10 financial advisors in there. So from a regulator point of view, dealing with 6 sort of institutional, groups to, 16,000, I mean, the policing it is really, over the top there. We even saw like the listed wealth companies, their share price, they dropped by 55%. They still haven't fully recovered yet. So we're seeing a lot of improvements. We've certainly cleaned out the industry, but getting to a point where we're actually changing everything back. So we've had things like a new financial exam, so all financial advisors have to pass the exam. A new code of ethics that were rushed in, that we've got a standard there that says that if you have a conflict, you cannot give advice. Being in business is a conflict. Charging advice fees is it's just rushed too much. So we had so much red tape from that point of view there. We've lost so many advisors. We've got new education standards. So instead of like a diploma, we've got a bachelor standard. So we lost, we started at the Royal Commission like 25,000 advisors, and now down to 15,000 advisors in 5 years. So all these extra red tapes has actually pushed out advisors from the industry, which has like really made advice non-affordable for most consumers. It's just over the top. Drowning in disclosure documents. We have annual advice disclosure documents. We have renewal advice disclosure documents. We have clients' consent to continue to charge fees and deliver services to clients. So some of those just don't even add any value to the the advice process at all, or to clients purely. So we've done definitely a full circle now. We're actually going through kind of like what we call quality advice review, where we're actually pulling back some of that red tape because it was just too over the top. We've even got like education exemption now. So for financial advisors who've got 10 years experience and a good compliance record, they no longer have to upgrade to the, the higher education levels and things like that, just so we can keep the advisors in the industry. What we are seeing is basically, funding back from overseas coming into Australia. So that's a positive sign that we're moving in the right direction after being over-regulated. So yeah, it's been fun times, but fun times going forward.
And we've got a big problem in the UK with the advice gap. There's not enough people getting advice, but we also have an advisor gap as well. So definitely some lessons to learn there, that we don't want to over-regulate, that we actually lose those people. And obviously we've been through things like the RDR previously, and we would have lost some then. We've kept the ones that genuinely want to be in the profession, and they work hard to qualify as an advisor. Aaron, can we just bring you into the conversation just so I can check you're actually still there, can still hear us, and all's going well? Could you give us a little bit of the perspective from America and what you're seeing there, please?
Sure. Well, it's been a really busy time over the last few months. The Department of Labor in the U.S., which is the principal and really only regulator of retirement assets, so both traditional pension schemes, but also defined contribution schemes, has introduced, I think let's say this is the fourth iteration of a fiduciary package since 2010. And just a couple of things that are worth knowing, and I think actually kind of tie into what you heard in the last session as well. The department only has authority over retirement accounts, but their authority is product neutral, right? So it doesn't matter if it's a security or an insurance product or what. If it's in a retirement account, the Department of Labor has that authority. And at least up until now, there's been a pretty big gap between when that money is in an employer-sponsored account and when it's rolled out of. So if the account you have at work and when it's rolled out into an individual retirement account. So that's something that has bothered certainly the professional staff and some political appointees at the department for some time. And so they have proposed, people call it the fiduciary rule. It's really a more complicated package. They proposed to redefine who would qualify, which kinds of advisors would qualify as fiduciaries. And then once they qualify, what they would have to do, in order to engage in otherwise prohibited compensation, which is really any compensation that could conceivably cause a conflict of interest. So the sort of pulling back at a broader level here, this has really been a saga for 14 years, going all the way back to 2010 with the Dodd-Frank Act. And, on a fundamental level, the sort of problem that at least some policymakers are trying to solve here is addressing this issue of having millions of people who, maybe 20, 30 years ago would have been in traditional pensions. They wouldn't have had to worry about their money, but are now in defined contribution pensions, often in defined contribution schemes where they've been automatically enrolled. And they may not know the difference between a stock and a bond. They come to a point where they're leaving their employer, where they're retiring, they have some serious money, and they need advice, but they also, regulators want to ensure they're getting good advice. And so this probably sounds pretty familiar. The positive observation I have from the US is, while we've been having this pretty protracted, quite partisan, quite bitter fight in the US around what those standards of conduct should look like for advisors, who they should apply to, which agency should be really taking the lead on this. We had a major regulatory package thrown out by the courts in 2018, and we had another one introduced. So while all that's been going on in the background, every single year has been better than the previous one from our data at Morningstar to be an investor. Fees keep coming down, asset weighted, on an asset weighted basis, we see fees coming down. We also can no longer find some of the distortions that we used to find associated with third-party payments. So we've done a lot of research on this, and we find that pretty much has went away in the sort of 2016, 2017 timeframe, whether that was the threat of regulation, promulgated regulations that ultimately didn't take effect, other secular trends. It's a little hard to disentangle, probably all three. But that's what we've seen. So I think that the problem that regulators may be trying to solve has probably evolved somewhat. And then kind of the last thing I think I should just mention for context, I talked about the Department of Labor's authority. That's the rule that's moving right now, maybe finalized in the next couple of months, if they're going to do it before our election. But there's sort of overlapping, but not exclusive authorities across different regulators. So, of course, the SEC regulates all securities, regardless of whether they are in a retirement or non-retirement account. And then you have state insurance regulators regulating insurance products that are not securities. But again, their authority is not account type specific. So we have sort of a problem with fragmentation and different standards of conduct and different regulators across products, where I think individual investors probably don't perceive them to be different products or in different regulatory schemes, but they are.
Excellent, thank you. Just a reminder to anyone, if you do want to put any questions forward, please do submit them and I can try and address them to our people, our guest speakers in Australia and America, so let's hope it continues to go well. Over here, so we've got the advice guidance where we're trying to sort of distinguish between the two, make sure we're defining them correctly, I guess. How advice is not an actual protected term, I guess, so that's where it can lead to some confusion. But what are we seeing? I'll start with, well, we'll go for America first in terms of how they define advice, or are there sort of any things real going on there as to what that should look like?
Yeah, so I'll come back to this, new draft rule that the Department of Labor is looking to finalize. If you look at the comment file, and I'm not recommending that you do unless you are, trying to fall asleep or something, but we have public comments here. We had hearings on this, and I would say the number one issue is people in industry seeking clarification around what is going to be guidance and what is going to be advice. And once it hits this definition of advice, then that triggers the requirement to comply with the other terms of the prohibited transaction exemption. So if you're a fiduciary and you're giving advice, then you have to comply with the rest of the regulatory structure. And so it's tremendously important. I'll give you my view on this, and this is informed by looking at industry response to all the varying proposals we've had and some final rules over the last 14 years. And that is that I think that this line, while very important for some actors, particularly some service providers to retirement plans today, this line is becoming less and less relevant, at least to some people, because the value proposition, right, of a lot of financial professionals now, when they're dealing with ordinary individual investors, is to both give guidance, how much should you save, when can you expect to retire, that kind of thing, and specific advice on what securities or investment strategies might help you achieve that goal. And so, I think that as that line has blurred, we're not in the era now where people who are working with retirement plans are just saying, my main job is to sort of give you a hot tip on the best mutual fund out there, right? They're doing much more comprehensive planning, and so I think they care a lot less about where that line is, because they're going to be giving something that qualifies as advice anyway. It may be in conjunction with guidance. So, I don't want to minimize this. Still tremendously important, still probably the number one issue of commenters, but I do think it's becoming a little less important as more and more actors figure, we're going to be giving advice as part of our ordinary course of business, along with other kinds of guidance that isn't making a specific recommendation.
Brilliant, thank you. Cheyenne, obviously you can touch on that as well, but we've had someone come in saying that actually that it seems like quite a negative assessment from Australia. And are you potentially saying that the advice market delivered better outcomes for clients prior to some of this regulation? So I'll let you try and attempt to answer that.
Certainly. So even though all advisors were kind of tainted with the same brush through the Royal Commission, we certainly had really good advisors giving really good advice. That was always there. A lot of the misconduct that was actually kind of discoverable, I guess, was more so service deliveries, more so advice that maybe wasn't so good, but also charging fees when you were not delivering the advice or the services that you promised clients and things like that. So there was a lot of that kind of misconduct that came out of it pretty much. We definitely got a cleaner industry. We've certainly got a better outlook on the industry. We're definitely a profession now. We're not salespeople that were, selling products. We actually do financial strategy advice now, which is fantastic. So, the future is brilliant and, very positive going forward. But we've certainly over the last 5 years experienced some really, painful over-regulations.
Yeah, and I think often here, regulation is cited as one of the biggest things keeping advisors awake at night, really, of all the new things coming in. There's a question for both of you. Is there one regulation that really works and has had a real positive effect on the professions in Australia and the US? And if so, what is it and what positive impact has it had? So Cheyenne, we'll stay with you for now then, if you could give us an answer for that one.
Yes. I guess the biggest thing is that we've just regulated what a financial advisor is, and it's a specific term now. So nobody can kind of do a course and just call themselves financial advisors. So only financial advisors can give personal financial advice. So that's now regulated, and the terms there. We do have a little bit of issue with what we call like general advice. So we regulate financial product advice, and you can give personal advice or general advice. General advice is more wider. It's not advice at all. It's pretty much, factual information, general guidelines and things like that. So there's still a little bit of a grey area, I guess, from that point of view. But regulating the term financial advisor has certainly have a clear pathway for our industry, which has been good.
Excellent. And Aaron?
So I'll try to answer the question with one piece of legislation, but I want to observe that one of the things that has become clear to me, and I think also to policymakers really in both parties here, is that regulation really does need to be product neutral, that there are conflicts embedded in almost every business model that's out there. And there are ways that both transactions-based business models and level fee type models, where you pay a percentage of assets, can work, and you can manage the conflicts in both of those. And both models can serve different kinds of investors, or investors who are looking for different things, want to pay for advice in different ways and at different times. And so we've certainly been pleased to see the reproposed rules, and reproposed is the wrong term, the new rules coming from the Department of Labor embrace that. The SEC's regulation best interest only applied to broker dealers, which is came out in 2019 and was finalized in 2020. So it's a little early to see how well it's worked, but I think it is something that is at least workable for industry. At a high level, I do think our regulatory structure for defined contribution plans is kind of a mistake. Nobody really intended to do this. We had a very strict fiduciary duty for employers for defined benefit plans, and that came out of a large bankruptcy. And it is sort of a weird thing if you think about it, because employers are not fiduciaries to their employees for anything else, right? I mean, they can make decisions that are not in your best interest, but when it comes to safeguarding your pension money, they are. And then Section 401k was created in the code, in the Internal Revenue Code, and they just sort of ported all those protections over. And that's not without challenges, but American investors in their retirement plans at work, especially large retirement plans, where there are sophisticated plan sponsors who are setting these things up, where they could be on the wrong end of a lawsuit, are offering, I think, probably the best defined contribution plans in the world. I mean, it's just not uncommon to pay 4 or 5 basis points and have access to, for all in, and have access to, a fantastic, diversified, indexed, a target date fund that will have a glide path that will take you to retirement. It's not uncommon to pay a little bit more and have access to somewhat more personalized advice through a managed account. And so, I think, although some of my colleagues may disagree, and there's been a lot of pain in it, I mean, I do think that the approach that we've sort of accidentally fallen into with workplace retirement plans has worked extremely well, notwithstanding the pain of a significant number of class action lawsuits that were sort of stopped being filed about 5-10 years ago, because the system was just so was just delivering so much for people, at least again at the large employer, and it's a lot harder for smaller employers to navigate this.
There's a question for both of you here. Beyond your own territories, who's ahead and getting it right? Cheyenne, we'll start with you.
Definitely Australia. We're definitely gone through all the regulations. We're overturning it and bringing it back, pulling it back a bit. So definitely, being from a regulator point of view, Australia has certainly seen it all.
But it's saying beyond your own territory. Anybody else getting it right?
It's really funny, with that quality advice review that we've just gone through, the head of that review actually spent time in UK and US and tried to bring the best of best back to Australia to actually go forward and have, a plan sort of thing to there. So I know we all have issues and we all have pain points that we like to fix. So we're pretty much all together, I think, from that point of view.
Yeah, do you think they're quite similar areas then that we can all learn from each other? Aaron, do you have anyone in terms of who you think beyond your territory?
It's a great question. I wish I had a good answer. But I think clearly every country is going through this transition. I mean, again, just to come back to this, and I'm sure most people would agree, this issue would not matter all that much if you didn't have millions of people who are pretty much responsible for figuring out how to save for retirement and then how to convert that into income. I mean, if those people were still in defined benefit plans, it wouldn't matter. And almost every country around the world has had this shift. I think we were probably just a little ahead in terms of that shift, for better or worse. And so we may be a little further ahead in wrestling with some of these questions. On the other hand, I suspect most countries do not have, I mean, all three countries we're discussing here principally do have challenges with fragmented regulation, but we have a really significant challenge with fragmented regulation that I don't think anyone would want to copy.
There we go then. So, note to self, we won't do that one. This is a question for either of you, so depending on who's brave or if you both want to. In the UK, we are stuck with a regulator, these are somebody else's words, not mine, an industry focused on products and a profession that needs to move to a focus on services. Have you seen this friction through your regulatory changes, and how has it landed? Anyone want to jump in on that one?
I'm happy to.
Yeah, excellent. Right. First volunteer, off you go.
Well, for sure. So basically, our industry, as you know, come through from pretty much life agents. So our industry was always focused on products, and the strategy financial advice piece wasn't always kind of there. Now we kind of have like the best interest duty, and we have steps in that. So basically we actually have to identify what the financial strategy is before we actually get to the product. So even our advice documents, a process and everything is identifying the strategy. So product is kind of like the end part, and it's only if a product is, feasible and in the best interest of the client. So we've definitely moved beyond selling products.
Excellent. We were talking to our pensions minister here, and we've obviously got an election this year. There's many elections going on all over the world. I think there's a big one happening in the US, possibly. So, Aaron, one for you. Is there a difference in the Republican versus Democrats' manifesto/objectives for pension policy?
It's interesting. So I started my career in government and at a congressional support agency, and one of the reasons I got into this was it has historically, when you talk about just the pensions, it has historically been pretty bipartisan. In fact, the major body of statutory, the statutory framework, ERISA, that governs pensions, passed like 96-0 in the Senate. And that was in 1974, so we're going back a ways here. But historically, it's been pretty. There hasn't been a ton of rancor. And in fact, in the past couple of years, there's been bipartisan agreement across both parties to have, near unanimous passage of two pretty important reform bills. And I would say, at a high level, these bills made some changes around the margins, but important changes. But when it comes specifically to standards of conduct, this has become an extraordinarily polarized and partisan issue. And in general, Republicans favor the approach that the Securities and Exchange Commission took, the SEC took in the previous administration with a previous chair. That was certainly more flexible, more principles-based, where Democrats have really been looking, particularly the Department of Labor, to have higher and stronger standards of conduct. And I think if you look for sort of some of the intellectual argument around it, the Democrats tend to see retirement accounts as being unique and different. And there's an argument for that. They're tax deferred. So, from a strictly, and because they're tax deferred, from a strictly sort of pecuniary interest, the government is owed a bunch of that money and has sort of incentive to see that it's well advised and growing. and obviously it's meant for a different purpose. Whereas I think you generally hear Republicans talking about wanting to harmonize to the standards that exist, outside of retirement accounts. And that may not be. I mean, these are big. We only have two parties, right? So they're not homogenous. I mean, there's a lot of heterogeneity. People have different views. So that may be a little bit of an unfair way of putting it. I do think that both sides come to this in pretty good faith, even if they really disagree. But we've certainly seen that kind of, flip-flopping back and forth in terms of the regulatory posture, depending on who's running the country. And I think that will probably continue, even as the standards continue to sort of gradually ratchet up.
Thank you very much. I've got a little timer flashing at me, so just very, very quickly, just like a one-word, couple of sentences, what would you like to see as a regeneration in terms of the world of advice where you are? Cheyenne, you go first.
I think we're all like one world pretty much. The digital era is here, so definitely more, I think, sharing of ideas is stopping pain points for other people and countries to go through the same things. So yeah, definitely.
Brilliant, thank you. And very quickly from you, Aaron.
Sort of my personal hobby horse, but I would like to see advisors, as a matter of routine, consider our Pillar 1 system, Social Security, when they're giving advice. It's still providing 30 to 50% income replacement for people, and often seems to be kind of, not always, but often seems to be kind of an afterthought. And I think it should be integrated in for a lot of the advice that people need.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it. I'm glad it worked all the way through, so thank you. Please give it up for our guests. Thank you to everyone for all the questions that came through. That was very good and all worked seamlessly, so that's brilliant. Sorry for anyone that I didn't get round to, but very pushed for time and obviously trying to make sure we hear enough from our guests as well. Up next, I think we've managed to get TV Steve Nelson back in the house. God knows how much this is costing us today to have him. And our colleague Rich, who apparently comes in a lot cheaper because of no TV fame, but you can usually see him as a temporary member at the moment in the Consumer Duty Band. So do check out the next concert there. So I will exit the stage and let them come on. Thank you very much.